I've not spoken out in all this time because every time I've tried to speak out, I've been shouted down and just been called evil and manipulative and twisted. Can't be more clear. I absolutely did not kill Jodi, and I've been locked up for a crime I did not commit. I will not admit to something I've not done.
The circumstances say he's guilty, but what does all of the evidence actually say? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jodi Jones. Viewer discretion is advised. Jodi was born in 1989, and she lived in East Houses of Midlothian, Scotland. She was the baby of the family. She was the youngest of 3 total siblings. The Jones family had experienced a few tragedies, including what happens to Jodi in this case. In 1998, Jodi's father, unfortunately, would end his own life, and this really sent a huge shockwave through the family. One of the older siblings would end up moving away to kind of just escape the turmoil, the sadness, the trauma, but would eventually move back to the home. Their mother, she had basically no choice but to stop working in order to physically take care of the kids, obviously with help from other family members. But ultimately, the family still managed to stay afloat. They were doing okay. Before Jodi hit her teenage years, she was described as someone who was very passionate about art, not only painting, but she also was a big fan of writing her own poetry. She was very, soft-spoken and level-headed. She was considered super intelligent for her young age. However, after her father died and then going into her teenage years, she really kind of took that rebellious route that a lot of teenagers really end up taking anyway. She went from loving like the softer, somber music to becoming really infatuated with like rock music and loud, metal music. She would end up changing her hairstyle a lot. She would dye her hair frequently. She would wear, more rocker style or, just different kind of clothing than she wore, as a young girl. When she was 14, she would end up finding her first serious boyfriend. His name was Luke Mitchell. He was 14 years old, going on 15 He was born in 1988, and he was one of 2 siblings, and he was the youngest. He grew up in a single-parent home. His mom raised both kids, and for the most part, he was considered a calm, gentle, quiet kid. He loved riding horses, and he also liked to ride motorbikes. And then by his teenage years, he too became fascinated by the rock and roll scene. And also, that's when he discovered drugs, mainly pot. He very much enjoyed smoking pot, and through this, he would also be able to acquire it, to share with friends. And that is how he ended up meeting Jodi Jones, through smoking pot. The 2 of them would meet in February of 2003, and they hit it off right away. They fell head over heels in love with each other, basically from the moment they locked eyes on one another. Jodi would end up writing in her diary just a couple of months after they started dating. She wrote this: "I think I am actually in love with Luke. Not in a stupid way. I mean real love. God, I think I would die if he finished with me. If I am crying, he hugs me and strokes my face. He is just so sweet. No matter what he says, I believe him." Wow, okay. That is love, I guess. I don't know. I've never experienced it. A few months into the relationship, Jodi would finally introduce Luke to her family, her mom and sisters, but I guess pretty soon after that, Jodi's mom found out that through Luke, Jodi was doing drugs and and acquiring drugs, and she didn't like that. So she would end up banishing Jodi from seeing Luke. That little ban lasted probably a month or so, and then on June 30th, 2003, her mom would lift the ban. And, well, sometime shortly before 5 p.m. on that exact June 30th day, Jodi would tell her mom that she was going to walk to go see Luke, because they lived relatively close to each other. There was like a road they could take that basically would end up connecting their homes. However, Jodi never made it to Luke's. Jodi also never came home to her house that night. Luke reached out to Jodi's family and said, I don't know where she is. She never showed up. So they began to search for her essentially right away. Luke had said that Jodi had started to use a little shortcut path in order to get to his house, and this was through like a wooded, foresty type area. Very secluded, very kind of dark, sort of ominous type path, but she was comfortable taking that route. So everyone was searching the neighborhood, and they were searching along that path that Luke had mentioned. Now, Luke, and I don't know the circumstances behind this, but he had a dog that I guess he was trying to train to become like a scent dog to pick up, to find people. So he brought his dog along to help search and try to pick up Jodi's scent. And apparently, according to Luke, the dog did. The dog would go almost straight towards this little V-shaped break in a wall in a very, very dark kind of just area. And so Luke decided to kind of climb this wall and jump over this little V-shaped crack. And then he turned a little bit to his left, and sort of covered by a bunch of trees, he found Jodi. And unfortunately, she was deceased. Jodi had her hands tied behind her back. Her throat had been cut very deep, almost to the point where she was decapitated. And she had many, many stab marks throughout her body. So police obviously were brought in immediately, and they began their search of kind of like the crime scene. Near the crime scene, they found like a tree, and etched onto that tree were the initials JJ and LM. JJ meaning Jodi Jones, LM meaning Luke Mitchell. So that would, of course, raise some eyebrows pretty quickly. But here's my thing about that. If they're going to automatically assume Luke is the killer, right? Why on God's green earth would someone etch their initials, their very obvious initials, right next to where the body was found? I mean, granted, Luke was 14, probably not the brightest kid in the world, but why on earth would someone do that? That's just like the most obvious, yep, hi, I did it, to me, but who knows? People also took notice of how quickly Luke and his dog were able to find where Jodi was. I mean, this was about 10:30 at night at this point, and he found her within probably, 30 minutes or so of the search starting. So people thought that was a little bit iffy, as if he already knew where she was. But again, he was using a dog that he was allegedly training to be a scent dog, and if that's the case, those can work pretty fast. They can pick up with their scent and go right towards it. And then kind of from there, the media took over this, and half the city's population all basically at that point said, all right, Luke Mitchell is guilty of this murder. He hadn't even been arrested or gone to trial, but the media was just painting him as the murderer. Trial by media, as they say. So into the investigation. The murder weapon, the knife, has never been found. Luke was a kid who liked knives, and he did own his own knife. The coroner would determine that the blade that was used was a stout and very sharp pointed blade. Luke owned a 4-inch skunting blade. I have no idea what that is. But that knife and its sheath were conveniently missing all of a sudden. It actually wouldn't be until a little under a year later or so, probably like 9-10 months, where the sheath of that knife was finally found. But the knife was still missing, it's never been found, and Luke has no explanation or story as to where it is. Concerningly, on that sheath was, for some reason, etched into it the number 666, and also JJ 1989 to 2003. Jodi Jones and her years of life. Yikes, that is not looking good, Mr. Luke. Next, Luke had said for his alibi that he was home the entire evening, and his mother would say that she saw him in the kitchen sometime around 5:15 or so that night. But then later, in a testimony, his own brother would refute the claims that Luke was home in the strangest of ways. His brother Shane said that at that time, Shane was watching porn in his room. And he said, I would never do that. And, other things while there were people in the house. So there's no way Luke was home during that time because I was going to Funky Town down below. So now later on, Luke's mom would end up being charged with perjury for basically lying about seeing her son at 5:15 or even her being in the house at that time. Next up, witnesses said they saw Luke wearing his signature parka jacket on the night of the murder. But suddenly, after the body was found, suddenly that jacket is gone and it's never been recovered. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it is very odd that it's the jacket he always wore, and just like the knife, is now suddenly gone forever. Other witnesses came forward to say that they saw a young man and a young woman sometime around 4:50 p.m. at the entrance to the pathway that Jodi would have taken. Now, at the time, using pictures, these witnesses would state, yeah, we're pretty sure that was Luke Mitchell and Jodi Jones we saw. But then later on at court, when this would go to trial, the person, those witnesses, could no longer identify Luke Mitchell as the man they saw. They couldn't do it. They were unsure. Another witness, I believe a friend, would go to police and say that Luke was boasting about something. He one time said that Luke said that he wanted to get high and stab someone. He wanted to know what it felt like. So that's also concerning, but again, this is just the word of a friend. Who knows how accurate it is. Don't do drugs, kids. Police discovered that Luke, at 4:54 p.m., had called something called the speaking clock to find out what time it was. I'm confused by this for one reason, because why wouldn't the phone he was using have the time on it? But I don't know. But police thought that was interesting because why, if he claims he was at home where there were clocks in the house, why would he be calling to find out what time it was if he was near clocks? When Luke was brought in for questioning, apparently he was a very belligerent witness. He was like a mean dude. At one point, he called one of the cops a fucking R slur. I don't really want to say it because I know that offends people. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. He could just be upset that he's being, railroaded as a suspect here. If I've learned anything from listening to JCS, a lot of times when the person being questioned comes off as angry and combative, that usually actually points more towards innocence than it does guilt. So, next up, a pathologist would come to the conclusion, and this is only speculation on their behalf, but they found a lot of comparisons between how Jodi's body was positioned and all where she was cut and her neck being cut as deeply as it was. He said it looked very, very similar to the murder of Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia. Well, apparently, 2 days later, and the reason why this they felt was relevant is because Luke had purchased a Marilyn Manson DVD. Oh, God, here we go. Let's blame music now. And apparently on that DVD, there is a portion of it that shows or talks about the Black Dahlia. Now, it's important to note, however, that there is no evidence or proof or anything to indicate that Luke Mitchell even knew of the Black Dahlia before he saw it on the DVD. So this odd connection between that is really kind of grasping at straws. It doesn't really mean anything, but they tried to make it mean something. So basically, police have this like mountain of circumstantial evidence. But what about physical evidence? Was there any physical evidence connecting Luke directly to this murder and crime scene? Well, there were 122 pieces of physical evidence collected from the crime scene and tested. There were numerous items that had DNA on them. Several of those were of male DNA. However, not one of them, not one piece of physical evidence had any conclusive tie to Luke Mitchell. Not one of them had a 100% match to him. There were other men who came up with some of that DNA, but not Luke. But the problem is not all of the items they can necessarily relate to the murder itself. This again is a very secluded area. Like one man who they found a condom with male bodily fluid in it. He had said, well, the reason why that's there is because it's a dark, secluded area, and I go there to pleasure myself. Okay, cool. But to not find any of Luke's DNA at all in this brutal murder, that's a little strange. It's a little odd. Not impossible to happen, it's just odd. That being said, Jodi's DNA was found on the trousers that Luke was wearing that night. But that even police said that could have happened because he found the body, and if he got grazed against her with the shorts, that's how it could have gotten there. Again, they were boyfriend and girlfriend. DNA can be on there for a while, so they couldn't say like, oh yeah, that's the reason why. Allegedly, Luke was seen burning items at this like incinerator, I guess the next day. When police went to that incinerator, they collected all the evidence they could, but they did not find any items that had any DNA left on them. So if there was incriminating evidence in there, it was long gone. But it is very suspicious that he was seen burning stuff, and we're conveniently missing items like the jacket he was wearing and, the knife. All of this being said, about 10 months after the murder of Jodi Jones, Luke Mitchell was arrested for and charged with her murder. Luke didn't stand a chance at trial. Like I said earlier, he was already painted guilty by the media. So again, trial by media had already taken place. He was just flat out guilty in the eyes of the media and half the population watching it. I'm not saying that's reason enough to say he's innocent. I'm just saying that you're not giving a person a fair trial when a trial is already happening in the public for like almost a year. What about other suspects? Well, there weren't any. Well, none that were actually investigated by police. Witnesses came forward to say that they saw various other men in the area of the woods during the time that Jodi would have been murdered. In fact, one of them even said they heard the sound of someone being strangled and like gurgling for their life, while who they had just seen another man in that area who was not Luke. Also, many people would report they saw a moped parked just outside the V-shaped crack in the wall, and it was there for quite some time, like at least an hour or so. And most people knew who that moped belonged to. It actually belonged to one of Jodi's cousins. The cousins, and actually there was two of her cousins were actually seen in that area, in the woods during the time where she was murdered, and then their moped was witnessed as well. So you have two different things placing them at the scene of the crime, and asked why it was there, the moped. They said, we have no idea. But they weren't investigated. No one investigated them. Police were like, nah. Another witness would say they clearly saw a man following kind of closely behind Jodi that evening, and it was definitively not Luke. A rumor came out, and please only take this as a rumor. This is not in fact or anything, but a rumor started that a man had come forward a few years after this and confessed to killing Jodi. And this was the man allegedly who was seen walking behind her that night. Now, I don't know if it's the same man, but there was a guy who was, that basically this guy's friend mentioned to police that this guy had wrote an essay which was called Killing a Girl in the Woods. This person, this man, also was seen with several scratches across his face, literally the day after Jodi was murdered. Also should point out, Luke had no scratch marks. He had no bruises. He had no defensive wounds anywhere on his body. But Jodi was also tied up, so that could explain why. But at any rate, the individual who had wrote that essay, who had scratches on him, who may have been seen walking behind Jodi, who may have confessed, that man is actually now deceased. He passed away. So the trial of Luke Mitchell began in late 2004, and towards the end of January 2005, he was found guilty of the murder of Jodi Jones. And it took about a day or so for the jury to come to that conclusion, but it was not a unanimous verdict. It was just a majority verdict that would convict him. And the judge would sentence him to life in prison, but he could be paroled after 20 years. Luke has always maintained his innocence, and this is an interview he gave.
I've not spoken out in all this time because every time I've tried to speak out, I've been shouted down and just been called evil and manipulative and twisted. Can't be more clear. I absolutely did not kill Jodi, and I've been locked up for a crime I did not commit. Not admit to something I've not done.
Luke appealed his conviction in 2006, and while the courts agreed that his initial interrogation was done, they said, outrageously and deplorably. That being said, the evidence was still against him, even without any of the questions he answered during the interrogation. So the courts upheld his conviction. He has appealed numerous times in the meantime and has always been denied. So, and that's where he stands now. He is still in prison. And I am very unsure about how I feel about this one. You all know me, who've been following me for a while, know that I'm big on this convicting a person beyond a reasonable doubt. And to me, there's just too much reasonable doubt here in this particular case. I just can't stand when a person is convicted with only circumstantial evidence, and that circumstantial evidence, like half of it, is like witness testimonies and hearsay kind of stuff. So it was very shoddy evidence to begin with. But I will say this, the most damning piece of evidence against Luke is that knife, is the fact that his knife conveniently went missing. And that sheath had Jodi's, 1989 to 2003. That's very suspicious. And then also the missing jacket, incredibly suspicious. To me, that is very concerning evidence that he disposed of the murder weapon because he killed her. And what was Luke's motive? It wasn't sex, because the two of them reportedly were already having sex, one, and two, she wasn't sexually assaulted. She was tied up and she was stabbed to death. So why would he do that? What's the reasoning behind it? They never really came up with a motive for this. Just the mere fact that there was other male DNA found near the crime scene, and none of it was Luke's, and the fact that there were witnesses who saw other men, including her own family members, near where she was murdered. The fact that there was, this mystery man who was following her, according to actual eyewitnesses, it just gives so much but it could have been someone else. I'm not saying Luke is innocent. Far from it. I'm saying I think there is enough to suggest that he did kill her. And mainly I'm really going towards that knife missing and a jacket missing and the fact that he was seen burning stuff. But the fact of the matter is there is also enough circumstantial evidence to suggest that someone else did it. So I'm just someone who wants conclusive evidence that a person killed another person before you lock them away, possibly forever. I don't know. So I'm very torn on this one, and I'm really curious to know what you guys think. I don't know. I don't know, you guys. Yeah, what do you guys think? But that is officially the end of this case. That is where we stand. I hope you guys found this one interesting. I'm not sure if you've heard of it before. If you want to see other cases by me in much shorter form, we're talking 3 minutes, possibly less, you can head on over to my TikTok page where I have well over 2,000 videos. So a whole bunch more cases to watch. It's Making a True Crimerer over there. I just hit 2.8 million followers, so that's pretty amazing. Getting really close to 3 million. Yeah, so please give me a follow over there. If you have a case you want me to cover, please send me a case to mikey@truecrimerer.com. That email will be listed below. If you first will please go to my link tree also below. Check my Crimerer case list in there. Scroll through it. There's a lot of names, but scroll through it. You can also search by hitting Control F on a computer or the 3 dots at the top of your phone. Plus then hit find and replace. Just type in the name, and if you don't see it, then email me. If you see the name, please don't email me because I already have it on there. I pick the cases I cover at absolute random. So it could be I cover it tomorrow or I cover it a year from now. I don't know. I just do that to be fair. And lastly, if you would like to support me in any way, I do sell merch. We have merch in the link tree below. We sell t-shirts and hoodies and mugs and a wine glass and other little things. I'm pretty sure soon we're going to have the Christmas ornaments up again. They were really big sellers last year, so I'm sure at some point coming in November we'll start to put those up. So that is the end of the video, and until next time, true crimerers, I'm eating an unfrosted Pop-Tart. Am I a serial killer? That's... Fuck. You don't confess to being a serial killer, Mike? No, that was not how I'm going to end my videos. One day. Well, we'll get it.